Carney will be visiting Canada's north. What should we be watching for? Why did he decide to go to Iqaluit?
Yeah, so let's start there. Why did he decide to go? We heard on Friday in his swearing-in ceremony, he talked about the three foundational peoples, the three backbone peoples of Canada, the British, the French, and the Indigenous. And this trip, as much as it's been about security and economics, it's also been very symbolic. He is visiting those same peoples. He was with the French, he's with the British, he's going to meet with Inuit leaders, with the Premier, PJ Iqaluit, later on this morning. This is as much Carney showing his version of Canadian nationalism and acknowledgement of our past as a country as it is trying to improve economic ties, trying to focus on key issues for him, like security, like especially with Ukraine, but also sovereignty and security in Canada's north. He's trying to tie in all of these real major components of the political zeitgeist, essentially, that we're focused on right now, while also acknowledging the ceremony, acknowledging his version of what Canada looks like. As far as what we should expect from this today, obviously there's going to be meetings, as I mentioned, with Inuit leaders, with the Premier of Nunavut. There's also going to be a military announcement. Now, as part of that announcement, I would expect some allusion to the creation of northern support bases. This is something that came out earlier this month, first week of March or so. We saw the Department of National Defense announce about $2.5 billion over the next 20 years to create northern operational support bases, which is about one step below a full-fledged military base in 3 northern cities, in Yellowknife, in Iqaluit, and in Iqaluit, where Mark Carney is going to be. Now, there could be more to this announcement, certainly, and we will be watching for that, but I would expect that to play a key component in what they're going to discuss today, especially given that he's being joined by the Chief of the Defense Staff and also the Defense Minister.
Now, what did he achieve on his trip to Europe, Colton?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us were a little surprised to see how much security played a focus in this trip. So much of the conversation prior to this trip was all about the need to diversify Canada's economy, diversify our trade, especially given where things stand right now with the United States ahead of potential free trade negotiations with the White House. And it was interesting to see Carney really frame this trip as something else entirely. Have a listen to what he explained as his priorities for this trip yesterday at a press conference.
The focus is on security. Deepening security partnerships with France, with the United Kingdom. Those discussions are necessarily sensitive. They're revealed in the full course of time. I'm encouraged by the progress that's been made. And it also includes economic opportunities with respect to, for example, artificial intelligence, critical minerals, broadening out existing trade relationships that are functioning quite well.
Now, Marcia, as you mentioned, he did get that bilateral partnership with France, increased cybersecurity and intelligence sharing cooperation. Interestingly, though, we didn't see a lot of movement with regard to free trade agreements. It's important to point out, while Canada has functioning agreements with France and the UK and the EU in large part, those agreements aren't really fully fleshed out at this point. CETA, which is what France is under, hasn't been ratified by 10 European nations, including France, and that prevents the document from being updated and modernized and really being brought up to the new economy that Canada and Mark Carney are talking about here when it comes to AI and quantum and using that as potentially any part of a free trade agreement. When it comes to the UK, they're operating under a continuity agreement of that same CETA deal after Brexit. So it's not really unique to trade relations between Canada and the UK. And while there was a lot of work being done on negotiating a new free trade deal, the UK walked away from the table last January. We haven't seen progress on that deal in over a year, and Mark Carney couldn't point to any additional progress made as a result of this trip. In fact, he actually said it wasn't really as much of a priority for him on this trip compared to the security elements of it. So perhaps a little shift in focus that was slightly surprising. Not a lot of real tangible results from this trip. At the same time, it was 36 hours in 2 countries and his first trip as Prime Minister, so perhaps a little ambitious to expect real movement on a trade deal where we haven't seen movement in over a year.
Colton, thanks for that update. Colton Praill in Ottawa for us. We want to move now to